Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
This is part 2 of Darryl's discussion with Joe about mortgages. Make sure to watch part 1 to know what a mortgage banker is and how credit has an effect on people's mortgages. This episode is about how to leverage your money using your credit, the maximum amount of a loan, and if rates are going to go lower.
So you mentioned Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and non-QM loans typically being investors on Wall Street. Are there any other loan types? What other loan types are there?
Obviously, we brushed on government-insured loans. Government-insured loans are great. They create wonderful opportunity for
That's
people.
FHA and VA?
Yes, FHA and VA. Typically, the FHA loan was made for the entry-level first-time buyer.
It's oftentimes people say, well, don't you have to be a first-time buyer to get FHA? And I go, no, it's not. It's made for first-time buyers typically.
Correct.
However, you don't have to be a first-time buyer for FHA. Frankly, and just so the audience knows, it allows one to kind of leverage their money. You can also buy a house with not such stellar credit score. So
Yes.
tell us about the positives of FHA and continue with what you're
Much more positive. Yeah, like as you said, the intention was made for the entry-level first-time buyer to create opportunity. Do not have to be a first-time home buyer to get an FHA loan or a VA loan. The FHA loan, 3.5% down, can be all gift. And in many places around the country, and especially for first-time home buyers, you qualify for either national or local grants. They call it down payment assistance, DPA. Borrowers can come in with no down, meaning they're getting a 96.5%. Instead of getting that gift, they're getting a down payment assistant loan to pay the rest of their down payment. There's some people based on their income can qualify for the 96.5 plus another loan for the down payment and another 2% for their closing costs.
People are asking, where are these grants coming from, or where can you get these grants? Tell us more about these grants. I mean, there's some city-sponsored grants and state
sponsored grants. Many of them carry an area they want to lend into. They also carry an income limitation because they're primarily trying to help the low-income buyer. They don't want to come in here and say, this guy makes $3 million a year and he's going to gobble up all the real estate. They're saying the person that has an entry-level income, we're creating opportunity for you to get into home ownership, American dream, get in and create your wealth. It's a wonderful opportunity. Many of them, they're trying to boost the areas of a community, meaning they're giving you opportunity. And in 5 years, they're going to even waive the down payment assistance portion. So there's a lot of great community programs out there that can help, especially first-time home buyers.
And I think it's important too, because I have had clients use those options, and you have to read the fine print. Not that it's a bad thing at all, just know what you're getting into, because sometimes there's some sort of equity share. I know that we had one locally, and if you sold a home within the first 5 years, they got paid back that and additional 50%. I'm guessing on the amount, but they get paid back a little bit more. They really wanted you to buy the home and keep it for at least 10 years, if not even longer. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. I mean, again, it's shown if you move in, people that are homeowners, because people have a pride of home ownership. They care. Their community gets greater. People realize that these counties and cities and states, they're investing in their own home ownership to create a greater community for themselves. So knowing that you're not just buying this, turn it into a rental, go get another one. Let me buy this, have you stay in it, and make the community greater. And they know it works. So that's why those programs are out there. We mentioned FHA, but we also talked about VA.
The VA, just for veterans. People have to be served in the military.
Correct. So I had to serve in the military. Probably the best loan out there. Now, your interest rate's going to be lower, probably maybe up to 0.5% in rate lower than a Fannie Mae loan. You get 100% financing. If you have an X amount of disability, you don't have to even pay what they call an upfront funding fee. So you could possibly buy, if you've never used your VA benefit, out of the military, you had some sort of disability, maybe it was a 10 or 20% disability, maybe.
That would be Army, Marines, Air Force.
Correct. All the branches of services. Correct.
Coast Guard.
Yes.
Guard?
Yep,
Okay.
they get as well.
Am I missing one?
No.
Army,
Air
Marines,
Force,
Air
Navy,
Force, Marines.
Marines,
The
and
Marines.
Navy.
How could I miss the Marines? My goodness.
They're all awesome. And you know, it's even great. I've seen some homes where the loan was the purchase price was $2.5 million. They had their full entitlement, means they've never used their entitlement for their VA. They funded it, and the guy had a slight disability for 100%.
Full. So there's not a maximum loan amount on
It's about, there's
VAs.
a few once you get over 1.5 million, there's selective amount of investors that want to end up with that loan insured, even though it's insured by the government. But I've seen up to 2.5 million, and somebody will probably say, "Oh, I've even seen more." But I've seen up to 2.5 million, 0% down, no monthly mortgage insurance, no upfront MIP, and your rate's probably three quarters lower
What's
in
in
rate
my
than you
what's
know.
MIP?
MIP is mortgage insurance premium. Like if you
It's like
typically
PMI.
yeah, PMI, almost
Same
the
thing.
same thing. And
Okay.
instead of paying that PMI amount, there's no PMI on a monthly basis. They do pay an upfront mortgage premium, but if you have a disability, that is waived. So I seen a $2.5 million VA loan with no down, getting a lower rate than they could go get a jumbo loan. What they needed to put 20% down, and their rate was about three quarters rate and lower in rate. So the benefits of that for their government opportunity is amazing.
That's phenomenal. We just spoke about PMI, private mortgage insurance. Tell us about private mortgage insurance. When is that required? If I remember correctly, it's if someone's putting less than 20% down. And
Yes.
then will it vary? Like if, for example, if they put 18% down, will they get a lower private PMI payment opposed to putting 8% down or 10% down?
That's correct. It goes in the multiples of 5, the percentage of what the cost is. And this is where your credit score matters a lot. The gentleman and couple with 620 credit score, they're going to be a very high risk. All these are as multiple factors looked at by mortgage insurance. What's the chance of them? All you're doing is you're creating a policy for the buyer to buy that they have to buy for the lender in case they get foreclosed on.
Yeah, it's
Then,
insurance. It's private
Yeah.
mortgage insurance, just like it's stated. But I mean, literally is insurance in case they default on the loan. They're basically saying, okay, we'll loan you this money, but you get another company to insure it in case you don't pay us back.
That's correct. And so if I go up to maybe put a little bit less down, 85%, my mortgage insurance rate is going to be a lot less than if I do a 95% or a first time home buyer with a 97. But as those credit scores get higher, it gets cheaper and cheaper because it's all data. They know what the percentage of the foreclosure is going to be based on that credit score. And it's true and it's correct. Now, it's funny this is going to be a complex thing. I know we're trying to make for a simple audience. There's ways to potentially take an 82% loan, actually pay for a whole policy, meaning I'm going to buy a lifetime private mortgage insurance policy, and it's going to be less than the LLPA hit I'm going to get.
You got to tell us what these letters stand for.
Loan level price, the risk adjustment that they apply to different loan to values.
Okay.
So I could actually take mortgage insurance and pay for it because imagine they know they say at 80% you have a low risk adjustment. But at
Meaning you're more than likely going to pay this loan back.
Correct. And so, and the higher, so actually you would think, wow, if I go above 80%, my risk adjustment is going to be greater. It actually goes down because the lender's factored in that they have a private mortgage insurance policy that they'll get paid back on. So they factor that into the rate. I've actually seen people buy out a one-time premium. And that's why the expertise of your lender is really valuable.
So in other words, some buyers are better off putting less down.
I can show you the math and I know I'm geeking out a little bit here,
No,
but
is
it's
great.
reality that I could take somebody, instead of having them put 20% down, I could literally save them money, less down payment and less loan costs at 82%, even though I gave them private mortgage insurance because
But they have to have good credit.
Oh, the answer to the question.
Yeah.
That's correct. So yes, so you're realizing this is all made depending upon past facts. What's the chances of somebody going to foreclosure? So obviously the person with good credit, the risk is going to be a lot less. The costs are going to be a lot less.
So speaking of rates and where they're at, 2025 of January, where are interest rates right now? And not only that, what affects interest rates? Everybody asks or thinks, I think, that the Fed determines exactly what the interest rate is, and that's not necessarily true. Tell us more about that and talk as if you're talking to a fourth grader or me. Same thing.
This is the best question. Nobody knows where they're going to go. Somebody asked me as a loan officer or if I'm mentoring somebody and they want to say, Joe, where do things? I don't know. I can tell you what's going to make it into a factor. You said the Fed Do they determine rates? They have an effect on rates. You've heard people say the Fed is planning on lowering the Fed funds rate by a half. And you'll see precipitously right after that, rates are going to start going down, 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 meaning they know that's going to have an effect on rates. Those rates start going down, and those rates are affected in what's called an MBS, a mortgage-backed security. They're traded on Wall Street. You can invest in them. Those is where your determines what those rates going up and down or be. So with the Fed funds rate getting cheaper, yes, that's going to have less pressure. It's going to create a lower mortgage-backed security. Well, before the Fed gets to that date where they make that decision, you see there's all these predictions. It's a 65% chance they're going to lower. And most of that's already been baked into the mortgage-backed security.
I have to tell people that all the time because it's interesting as far as the sales of homes. It's the rumor that typically will cause a reaction, meaning and this is kind of counterintuitive, when there are rumors that the rates are going to go up, oftentimes we see an influx of buyers wanting to get into homes prior to the rising interest rate. So don't get me wrong, typically lower rates are better for everybody due to the fact that you simply have more people qualified. But go ahead.
Correct.
I'm sorry. Just
No,
continue.
that's a great question because the people read the news and so they say, well, the election's coming up and they're going to lower rates. He says right about that time. But if you would have followed the mortgage-backed securities and interest rates, they all got lower. Well, then it came up to the fact and they said, yep, we did lower it, but we probably are going to put a hold on lowering it in the future. But the announcement was they lowered it, the Fed funds rate by a half. So everybody says, well, you quoted me 7% yesterday. I guess I'm 6.5% in rate today. It's already been baked in. And now the guidance says they might be holding off on not doing it for a more long period of time. And now it's had a opposite reaction. Just before the election, you saw these things happen and rates went extremely higher and they kept going higher. And so, but the borrowers, of course, they call every loan officer and they say, why didn't I get a half a point? I floated this whole time. Why didn't my rate go down by a half? Hopefully, again, we're not interest rate experts and definitely not interest rate prognosticators, but we can tell them that, hey, once these announcements are made, most of that's baked into the mortgage-backed security. So the mortgage-backed security is what's driving the actual rate, but things like inflationary items are really devastating for rates to go higher.
Meaning, if we see a lot of inflation, rates will typically actually go up.
Go up because if the Fed lowered rate, if they drove rates down, the inflation number would go even higher. That's going to stagnate the market even more. So inflation's about the worst thing you can have in the economy. And we're talking about rates today. You see how big shot up today in interest rates. Well, there was this wonderful number that came out about employment numbers. There was a huge surge in new employment. Again, that would be an inflationary item, not deflationary. Again, mortgage-backed security stopped trading off. And there's a sell-off of mortgage-backed security because people say, oh my gosh, rates are going up. And I'm investing in the rate today, right? So if mortgage-backed securities and the rate goes higher, my value of my mortgage-backed security is going to be less. So that's what those mortgage-backs are being traded on a daily basis.
So you've got the Fed, you've got inflation, you got a jobs report. It's interesting because almost positive, is it fair to say in the most part, not always 100% like this, but if there's positive economic news, that typically means rates are going to go up. Whereas bad
Correct.
jobs report, the Fed, inflation, is there something else that'll affect rates that people need to know about? Is it anything to do with, for example, with foreign investment coming into the country? Or then there's, of course, there's quantitative easing as well.
Yeah, and the quantitative easing, right, is what is that going to do? Quantitative easing is going to typically create inflation because what are they doing? They're easing the amount, and that's actually creating more dollars. Creating more dollars means less buying power, more inflation.
When they first do that, it creates lower rates because there's more
Correct.
available money. But long term, or eventually, and that's kind of what's happening right now, possibly, is because of all the quantitative easing. Say that 4 times that's been done. Now we're kind of paying the piper, so to speak, because now these rates, so much money's out there. This is probably too complex for a lot of people. It's too complex for me. But there's so much money out there that they have to raise those rates. Is that fair to
Yes,
say? We're
that's
seeing
a great point. Actually, you made actually economics simple. So you're one of the most successful guys I know in the Orange County area. People use you a lot. You know what you're doing. You've done a lot of rates, probably purchases 7 years ago at 2.5%, 3%. A lot of buying power in that. But what happened is we had this thing called COVID. And during COVID, they printed a lot of debt creation. You could call it printing of money. So just think if you and I have this world economy, it's $100 and we are trading. If we made that $100 into $400, and now I want to buy your lunch from you today, I might have cost me $1 when there was only $100 circulating around. Well, now there's $400. It might be $4 for that sandwich I get to buy from you. So that's all this money printing that happened and debt creation. It created all this inflation. It created the value of the dollar to be less. So that's again going to drive up the interest rates because, at that point now the money's not worth as much.
So what are rates right now? What's today's rate? I get asked this question almost every day. I tell people, well, it's around 7 because it literally
Yep.
can change multiple times in a day, right?
Yep. I mean, again, I would say right around 7 would be a great number to go today. You would have 15-year lending. The money's going to be paid back faster. So they're going to give you a lower rate because the longer the term of the lending, the longer that lender, whoever's at the end investing in this, is going to get a return on their money. The quicker they get it back, because that 7% rate that they had, if tomorrow we're lending and inflation goes high and they're lending at 12, boy, that $7 or 7% interest rate they have on their money is only worth probably 50 cents on the dollar compared to now lending at 10%.
I remember when I first got into business, when rates got below 8%, this was back in the 90s. And our office was cheering and going, oh my goodness, can you believe rates are below 8%? And here we are at 7%, and everybody's really choking on this stuff because they're so used to these 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5, 6% interest rates. And another thing too, I'm sorry, I wanted to chime in on your part about the experts and nobody knows where interest rates are going. I tell you, I've been watching interest rates for 35 years, and what Joe said is 100% accurate because I remember specifically listening to the world-renowned economists, America's best economists from Harvard, from Chapman University, saying, you'll never see rates low as this ever in your life. And that was at 4.5%. And we got down to, what was the lowest rate that we got down to? 2.25?
Yeah, 2.25, depending if it's a 15-year loan, a 30-year loan.
Yeah, 30-year loan.
Yeah, probably 2.25 is about the bottom. That was an interesting time. I don't want to ever say I know rates are going up or down, and that is in a short-term period. I've been doing this a long time, like you, 35 years. And I remember rates were in the 10%. I went into this economic class and they mirrored us against Japan after the war. And they talked about populations and economic growth, how things were going to work. And I was looking, I'm like, wow, our bond numbers and a national interest rate are literally like chasing them by 10 years.
Explain bond numbers after you're done with this. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the bond market, again, mortgage-backed securities. So people buy bonds, they're buying like securities. Hey, I can buy this security today for 7%. I'm going to get a 7% return. That bond or that mortgage-backed security is going to last. But now if current rates went to 10%, and let's say I paid $100,000 for that bond, and now I could go buy a bond for 10%. If I was to go sell that bond for 7%, it might only be worth 60 cents on the dollar. So these fluctuating rates, and when you tie into a long-term bond, mean a lot. But the bond market is much bigger than the stock market. But you'll see there's an influx of money sometimes going into stocks or out of stocks and into bonds. And again, usually when the economy is doing great, money runs over into the stock market. Just like when rates went down to 2.25, we had economic, massive foreclosures. All these things were driving rates down because people were not wanting to tie themselves into bonds. They wanted to, because the economic situation was so poor. And then again, we got out of that, and then we started printing money. Now we're driving up ourselves into we might even got up to the 8.5% range for a while a few years ago.
And just to clarify, people buying bonds, the bond market being stronger is going to decrease the interest rate. In fact, is it also almost fair to say, even though it's not 100% accurate, when the stock market goes well, interest rates typically will go up? Fair?
Correct.
Typically, but it didn't do that. I mean, we had a rare occasion when we had the stock market going up and interest rates going lower, but that was because of the printing of money.
And then when you have these economic situations where everything is where there's a liquidity crisis, that's when everything gets poor. That was the worst case. A lot of times when, like, we have traders that run our company, we hedge interest rates. We know we have a X amount of locked loans. We're going to sell them out of X loans. And so we might hedge against that to say, well, if rates go up, because we don't sell them for maybe 45, 60 days. So we have to make a hedge against that. Well, sometimes when there's a liquidity crisis, people sell everything. A bank crashes and they're in trouble. They have to sell all their assets. That's when those are the worst case scenarios, when all assets go down and follow that.
But all things being said, right now, it's not that challenging to get a loan. Meaning obviously you have to have good credit, good income, et cetera, but you've seen worse times. Talk to us a little bit about the available money out there and how.
That's a great question. The availability of credit has increased. Like we were talking about 100% loans when you add a DPA to it. There's non-QM loans, which allows me to buy based on my business deposits, or maybe you're a realtor. Some realtors get paid in 1099 and they file a Schedule C or a corporate return and they write off all their business expenses. Well, we could take that 1099 and qualify somebody 100% based just on their 1099. That's a lot of buying power, a lot easier to get financing. So I think the credit opportunities right now are great.
Yeah, it's interesting with rates. I think it was Dave Ramsey where I first heard this. However, maybe somebody else coined it, is when the rates went higher, it actually was a blessing for a lot of people. And the reason why is I remember back at the beginning of 2022, for example, we literally had maybe even a fourth of the number of homes on the market, meaning there's so many buyers that there was no choice. There were no houses to buy. I would have 25, 35, 50. I had 100 offers on this one house. So, I mean, when these rates go up, I think the buyers need to look at that in the full picture. And Dave Ramsey had this phrase that said, date the rate, marry the house. So when these rates go up, this is not all bad news, because it could allow and will allow a lot of buyers to actually be able to find a home that they actually like and really want. And then, by golly, opposed to waiting for rates to come down, because nobody knows for sure when they're going to come down, if they are at all.
Correct.
And then if they do come down, then you could refinance at that point. So you date the rate and buy the house. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. It's not.
I love that term because yes, I'm buying a home. Oh, I don't want to buy a home until rates go down to 3 and I have a much more affordable payment. Well, if rates were 7, that house is going to be a lot less expensive because the amount of people that can qualify for that home is much less. So when that rate goes down to 3, the value of that home, because now the affordability, it's going to increase buying opportunity, and that house price is going to typically go up.
Skyrocket, and the fewer homes.
And it's all about your entry point, right? I can only get one entry point. Right, you got to get that entry point, and I'd rather have that entry point of the house at $700,000 and have a 9% rate, because then buying it at 1.2 million and have taxes on 1.2 million. But boy, I got a 3% rate, because you can always refi later.
You might be able to answer this question. It's just occurred to me because I get this question asked a lot. People ask me all the time, Darryl, who are buying these houses? Because these houses, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I remember when they were 250,000, now they're 1,250,000. Joe, I have to tell them, I say, you know what? Frankly, I don't know, because all I do is I talk to the lender. The lender says, yeah, they got great credit, they got great income, they have great credit scores, etc. And I don't necessarily know them. I don't even know if you can answer this question or not, but you might be able to. Who are buying these houses? Are they just a lot of people that have really good jobs, obviously?
Yeah, there's a job that's come out there that I see more and more these days is a traveling nurse. They pay really well. They have great benefits and a high rate of pay. I'll tell you, I've seen more and more traveling nurses buying, but there's just more and more people that realize that they must get into a house because that's where their future value, because you buy one home, right? That starter home probably kicked your net worth. And if you look at that entry point and the equity on that, now whether you sold it, you took some equity out, bought another home, and you bought another home, and that's where people are creating their net worth. They buy that first home when they're in their 20s, and next thing you know, and they're in their 40s, and they got their 3 or 4 homes. Many of them are making money, and they're turning around and investing into more.
That's what I mean. What are they? So you got traveling nurses. That's interesting, because I'm serious. I get this question all the time. What engineers? I see engineers. I mean, and maybe you don't know exactly. I don't expect
I see
you to,
it all. I see it all.
What careers, what jobs are these buyers doing that are allowing them to make these $6, $7, $8, $10,000 a month payments? What do you see the most common? You said traveling nurses. Are there any other ones that
Traveling
come to
nurses are
mind?
one that's just increasing because as I run a lot of different departments in a bank, one of them I look over like the income desk, and we help people get pre-qualified, and the bank is we talk about pre-approving people up front before they even put their offer in, and I've seen an excessive amount more of those, but definitely the self-employed borrower. I think there's a great number of people that have created a lot of asset wealth. There was a lot of money printed during COVID. A lot of new millionaires are out there. There's a lot of new billionaires out there. There's a lot of people that made money on Bitcoin, and I am by no means an expert in Bitcoin or e-currency, but I can tell you there's a tremendous amount of value out in e-currency and Bitcoin, and people have converted that to cash. They can convert that cash, and they can do these. Hey, sorry, we come back to that non-QM loan again. They could do things like asset depletion with no job.
Those are investments they sell for the down payment, but are they getting income from these investments? Are you seeing a lot of people that are getting income from, and is that who the borrower a lot of times are? Or the
Yes, I mean,
buyers?
this wonderful thing we call non-QM, like I said, it's up to 40% that predicted to get to 70%. They understand this borrower has $1 million. They bought that Bitcoin 12 years ago for 10 grand, and now they have $2 million worth of Bitcoin. They've liquidated into cash. It's been in their bank account for 60 days. That is their money that they can qualify in. I could be 25 years old with $2 million in the bank, divide that by 60, and that's my qualifying monthly income.
So some people are depleting their savings to make the mortgage payments.
It's not even depleting their savings. What they call that is asset depletion to be able to make the payment. So the bank is saying, you have $2 million sitting in there. We're going to deplete that over a 60-month period and use that as your monthly qualifying income. And that's going to give you so much purchasing power. That purchasing power, we're in an inflationary market. My value of my home's going to go up. I'm going to take that equity again, and I'm going to purchase another home and another home. And there's many clubs out there. You've probably seen them out that are helping people strategize how they can keep increasing their equity wealth or buy more properties to create equity and to create valuation, to create wealth.
So investors are a large portion of it, just even private investors, meaning not necessarily the big companies. That's another thing that I get people ask.
Stay tuned for part 3, where Darryl discusses with Joe about the possibility of seeing 5% interest rates, why it's not necessary to put 20% down, and why a force-placed insurance is something you should avoid. Only on the Jones Zone.